Uh, I'm Andy Winnick. I'm the president of the American Institute for Progressive Democracy. You can see our signs up. We're the primary organizers for tonight, and I'll take a little bit more about us in just a second. But before going any further, I want to make it a point that we are co-sponsored tonight, and without the support of these other people and agencies, we would not be having this discussion. So we have been co-sponsored by, if you're ready for the list, the History Department, Economics, Politics, and the Chicano, Latina programs at Pomona, by the Native American Pipeline to College program, which is sponsored through Pitzer and Western University, by the Intercollegiate Feminist Center for, I'll try and get this right, Teaching, Research, and Engagement, by the Draper Center for Community Partnerships, which has been very, very helpful to us, and at CGU by the Department of Politics and Policy. And so all of these agencies have, some have provided some of the speakers for tonight, but some money and support and publicity, and have been really essential to this, bringing this all together. In addition, I owe three thanks that I really need to make to Karen Fagan, who is the Director for Public Projects and College Events for Pomona, Joe Brennan, who's the Director for the Media Center and Classroom Support for the Media Support, and Cindy Cruz, who's the Events Coordinator for the Office of Communications. And all three of them have done a lot of work to make all what's happening possible. So my thanks to all of them, and we all should thank them. Let me talk a little bit about the Institute for a second, and then I want to introduce the topic tonight. The American Institute for Progressive Democracy is a small think tank located here in Claremont. We began about 6 or 7 years ago. The idea was that you have in the East Coast the Brookings Institute, the Institute for Policy Studies, and what have you, but you really do not have progressive think tanks much on the West Coast, and so we presumptively decided we were going to try to do some of that. Our slogan, which is on the sign here, is engaging thought, promoting action, and we have put on a whole series of public forums over the last few years. We did a major forum on health care, and did some policy papers on that, trying to influence Obama during the time between his election and his inauguration on health care. We later did a follow-up one on implementing the Affordable Care Act for people in town and what have you. A few years ago, we did a major forum on the Citizens United Supreme Court decision and the impact it was having on democracy in this country. And then we followed up last year with a forum on water scarcity and solutions from the global to the local. It was a full-day conference with four different sessions with experts from around the country and what have you on that topic. Today we're obviously talking about the question of inequality in America, and to sort of introduce and set the stage for that, one of the other hats I wear is a professor of economics. I've taught at a number of universities in the United States and in Europe. And 25 years ago, almost to the day, I published a book that was entitled Toward Two Societies: The Changing Distributions, notice the plural, of Income and Wealth in the United States since 1960, looking at a 25, 30-year period from 1960 through the mid and late 1980s. What that study revealed, and the point that it was looking at, was that from the period from 1960 through the mid-70s, and that actually goes back to about 1945 through the mid-70s, so about a 30-year period, income inequality in the U.S. was less and less. That is, inequality decreased, equality increased, the gap between the rich and poor shrank, the percentage of total income and total wealth that the wealthiest controlled was less than it had been in prior years, and the middle class went through a massive expansion, not just in absolute numbers, but as a proportion of the population. And then things changed. Starting in the mid-70s, all of that reversed. And what we began to see starting in the mid-70s through when the book was published in just short of 1990, so a 25-year period, 30-year period, was that the income gaps began to widen, the gap between the rich and the poor widened, the gap between the rich and the middle class widened, the gap between the rich and the near-rich widened, the proportion of national income and of national wealth controlled by not just the top 1%, but the top 1/10 and even 1/100th of 1% increased dramatically. Wages stagnated. Wages which had been going up with productivity for 30 years stagnated and basically has had little growth during the last period. And that was as of 1990. And the question is, what's been happening in the last 25 years? And the answer is it's all gotten worse. And so we'll be looking at that today. The Institute looking at this and looking at the extent to which the issue of inequality in America has now become a major topic of politics. This is now both political parties are beginning to talk about it from very different perspectives. Their solutions are very different. And I suspect some of our speakers may get into that, and we can get into that during the question and answer period. Our concern was to look at what's been going on, update this earlier study to the current time, and basically we're looking now at a 40-year period from 1975 to 2015. And what's been happening, and as the subtitle for tonight's presentation says, what are the causes, what are the consequences, and are there remedies? And that will be what we will look at tonight. Now, we are doing a second forum. If you look at our signs and our handouts on campus, you'll see that exactly 4 weeks from tonight. So on the 31st of March, in the same room at the same time, will be the second shoe will drop. And that will be a more detailed micro-analysis, to some extent, of the impact of inequality on diverse parts of our American community. We will have someone there talking about the impact on the African-American community and the Latino community, on the Native American community, and then we will have someone who's an expert on the issue. She heads up back east in the University of New Hampshire, a center on the vulnerability of families, and she'll be speaking on the issue of the impact on women, children, and families, acknowledging that while the impact in the minority communities, the so-called minority communities, although our country is rapidly becoming a majority minority country, but on the impact of minorities as a proportion of their groups is very high, it is still the case that the largest proportion of the poor and the poorest among us are white. They're still running about 35–40% of the total. And that women are impacted a lot more than men are, and that children are impacted horrifically and in this country. And so that will be the topic of our next forum. Today we're trying to get an overview of what's causing these changes in inequality. And so without further ado, let me start that. You have programs in front of you, and so I won't sit here reading them to you. You have more detailed biographical information about each of our speakers. So I urge you to take a look at that and familiarize yourself with the speakers and their backgrounds. David Grodsky, who is the director for the Center on Poverty and Inequality at Stanford University, which is one of 3 nationally chartered centers on the question of poverty and inequality in the United States, will be our first speaker. He will be followed by Young Ha, who is from the Claremont Graduate University, Department of Politics and Policy, who will be looking at the impact of globalization and international impact on the American. She's not going to be talking tonight, although she could, about the impact internationally, but the focus on what that has done here to us in the United States. Then Michael Steinberger, who is the chair of the Department of Economics here, and who has written widely and teaches courses on exactly the topic that's underway here tonight, will be speaking. And then finally, David Menifee-Libby, who's the director of the public policy program here at Pomona, will be speaking on the question of, can education solve the growing economic inequality? That's obviously a very rich topic and something that has been talked about rather widely. To what extent is education the solution, or is it not an adequate solution? He'll be addressing that question. So without further ado, I will get out of the way, and David, we have 2 Davids. David Grodsky, so